For our daily cancellation, we turn to American Idol. The most interesting thing about this show is that it is apparently still on the air. I don't know if it's an indication that I'm out of touch or that American Idol is irrelevant, but until this moment, I thought American Idol was canceled years ago. I suppose that's a false choice, however. I mean, the answer could be and probably is both. I'm out of touch and the show is irrelevant. Be that as it may, it was back in the cultural conversation ever so briefly this week, but not for anything related to music or singing. Instead, it was the story of one contestant, and more specifically, a judge's reaction to that story that had people talking. Watch.
In May 2018, a gunman walked into my school. I was in art room 1, and he shot up art room 2. Before he made his way to art room 1. Lost a lot of friends. 8 students were killed. 2 teachers were killed. And it's just really been negative, man. Santa Fe's had a bad rap here since 2018. What you doing, Katie?
Our country has failed us.
Facts.
This is not okay. You should be singing here because you love music.
It's true.
Not because you had to go through that.
I agree.
You didn't have to lose 8 friends. I hope that you remind people that we have to change. Because you know what? I'm scared too.
It's terrible, Katie. It's horrible.
Now, before we deal with the substance of Katy Perry's response, to the extent that it had any substance, we cannot ignore the incredible narcissism on display here by her. Perry has apparently attended the same training seminars alongside Giselle Fetterman to learn how to make other people's traumas about yourself. He is calmly recounting his own horrific experience, and Perry uses it as a platform to put on this over-the-top emotional performance. She even relates it back to herself somehow. I'm scared too, she says, as her fellow judges comfort her. They start patting her on the back and comforting her while the kid who was actually in the shooting stands there and watches. Here's a hint. If someone is telling you about something awful that happened to them, your response should not contain the words I or me unless you're saying something like, I'm so sorry or I'm here for you. But if you're attempting to put yourself at the center of this person's suffering or deflect from it so that the focus is on you and your own emotions, then you are a classic narcissist. And maybe worst of all, you're creating an incredibly awkward situation for everyone else who has to be in the room with your lack of self-awareness. I can only imagine how uncomfortable it must have been for that young man to be standing there, not sure what to say or how to respond as Katy Perry launches into her camera-ready monologue like she's auditioning for a soap opera. A monologue that was planned, by the way, considering that the judges would have known ahead of time that a contestant was coming up who'd been in a mass shooting. That fact was certainly conveyed to Katy Perry and her cohorts by the producers before the kid got up on the stage. She didn't burst into tears spontaneously. She had all this planned in her head ahead of time. And I understand that this is a very cynical interpretation of events, but I've been around long enough and I've been in media long enough and I've met enough of these sorts of people to justify my cynicism. But what about the actual point she was making in her scripted diatribe? She says that the country has failed the victims and survivors of this school shooting. And of course, she means specifically that it failed by not passing enough gun control laws to prevent the shooting from happening. Never mind that the shooter already broke a dozen different laws in carrying out his crime. It's unclear how exactly it would have helped to add 1 or 2 more laws onto the pile that the killer was already determined to disregard. You can only make an act illegal so many times before the laws start to become redundant and therefore useless. Yet this is what we so often do in our culture. When a bad thing happens, we declare that the bad thing is the result of some sort of failure. It's always a systemic failure of government, of policy. People like Katy Perry take solace in the idea that all tragedies are policy failures because, and really all bad things, they say poverty is a policy failure too. Because for one thing, it gives them an excuse to push their political agenda, obviously, but for another, it comforts them to think that the right policies, if we could finally land on them, would banish all the bad things from our midst. When Perry says that the country failed because there was a school shooting, what she means is that we ought to have a country where there are no shootings at all. And she's right in the sense that every mass shooting and every bad thing shouldn't happen. That's why it's a very bad thing. If there's something that's evil, like any evil shouldn't happen. But Perry, like any other leftist, believes that a country without any murder, without any bad people doing bad things, is actually practically achievable, and that it can be achieved through policy. The irony, of course, is that the utopianists who imagine that a world of perfect peace and harmony can really be achieved tend, through their policies, to create a world that is ever farther away from peace and harmony. Worlds like the world of Chicago, for example. People with Katy Perry's worldview run most of our major American cities, and most of our major American cities are violent, crime, and disease-ridden hellholes, which actually isn't all that ironic when you realize that effective governance means understanding human nature. And understanding human nature means acknowledging that bad people will always exist and they will always do bad things. You can do a lot. You can do a much better job of containing and mitigating the damage, but you can only do that once you've acknowledged the fallen state of man, and that although you can mitigate the damage and try to contain it, there will always be damage to mitigate and contain. With all that said, it's still true that a school shooting represents a failure. In fact, it's a whole series of failures. But they're mostly the kinds of failures that Katy Perry and her ilk never want to talk about. First of all, it's a moral failure of the person who carries out the deed. People have agency, they have free will, they choose to do things. They should be the first people we blame for the things that they choose to do, rather than pinning it on the country. And also, very often, there have been parenting failures that help to produce the sorts of people who would do something like that. And failures in a culture which breeds people who have no meaning, no purpose in their lives, seemingly no capacity for empathy or love. These are all failures. And they're the kinds of failures we skip over, focusing instead on debates over gun control. And that itself is also a failure. One which only ensures that this kind of thing will keep happening with the same or greater frequency. And that is why Katy Perry is today finally canceled.